Very welcome again to this series in Liberty Hall, and just to remind you that we want to thank the Department of Tourism, Culture and Dublin City Council for their sponsorship and all the unions and others that have taken part. This morning's session, I don't think most of you need any introduction to Charlie Callan, but he is a former president of the Labour History Society, long-time activist in it. And one of the great things about Charlie is that he has done research on a lot of the lesser, if you like, not lesser, people, but lesser well-sung people in the trade union movement. And, he has a wealth of biographies sitting there, ready to be published. When I was doing Left Lives 4, I approached Charlie, and it was a case of, here's some I made earlier, so that's Charlie. So without further ado, I'll introduce Charlie, and as is the norm, we will have questions afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you for the invitation, Cathaoirleach, and thank you for attending today. As what I have to say today is based on an accumulation of detail, what I propose to do is, of necessity, is go through it in a sort of a hop, skip and jump fashion, in the hope that we'll have time at the end whereby anyone who wants answers to detail or to tease out particular aspects of it, we will have time to do that. And I'm asking you, Cathaoirleach, to keep me in order time-wise. There are essentially two main features in the life of Chris Ferguson. Now, the title of my talk is Credit Overdue, It Seems to Me. And it deals with Christopher Ferguson, born 1904, died 1957, the age of 52. My interest in him dates from almost 50 years ago. In 73, you had the 50th anniversary of the Workers' Union of Ireland, and it published a brochure. And slim and all as it was in addition to the quite meagre Labour history library that existed at the time. And in this brochure, there was a picture of Ferguson, and it said National Organiser of the Union, 1947-57. Nothing else. And I was deeply involved in workers' union affairs at the time and thereafter. But everywhere I went looking for information on this man, nobody knew anything about him. And the more I found that to be the case, the more I became interested in knowing who this person was and who'd been so quickly forgotten. So, like I say, what I'm saying is based on a whole load of detail. He was born in the Church Street area in February 1904. His parents, Simon and Julia, couldn't sign their names throughout their life from the documents that I've seen. He was the first of about, I think, 5 children, all boys except one sister he had. He probably attended Brunswick Street boys' school, which is off Church Street, as you know. He spent he spent all of his young life living in the Church Street area. He was born in 54 Church Street and lived most of his time in the upper numbers, 116 and 123. Now, I think that the environment in which he was born and lived in that period, and this is speculation on my part, but it cannot have been other than influential, because in addition to a really vibrant area with all sorts of industries around the place, you had the law, you had all of the markets, you had several religious institutions, you had the St. Michael's Church of Ireland, and you had the Capuchin Church, you had the Matthew Hall, a whole range of life and institutions. And it was there in 1913 where the 2 houses collapsed, where 8 people were killed. And it was also there in 1916 that on both ends of Church Street you had significant military action. In the period 1920, you had two very significant events in Church Street. One was a raid on a military base at the King's Inns, up at the top of Church Street, and the other was the case in which 3 soldiers were killed, and with the resulting effect that one of the people, Kevin Barry, was hanged later for it. All of these things, I believe, had to have an impact. The other huge thing that must have had an impact on him was that you could see before your eyes in that area the effect of political action, to the extent that after the collapse of the housing in 1913 and in the following inquiry into it, one of the first areas to be rejuvenated in the city by the city council was in the Church Street area, and his family was allocated one of those houses on Church Avenue. In addition to that, you had the extensive housing provided by the Dublin Artisans Dwelling Company, in excess of 3,000 in that particular area alone. Now, in 1918, when he was 14 years of age, he started as an apprentice in the railway works in Inchicore. And 2 days after his 15th birthday, on whatever date, the 21st of February 1919, his father died, leaving Ferguson the principal, the adult, besides his mother in the family. And things cannot have been other than straightened thereafter. However, his involvement in affairs dates from October 1919, when he joined the Fianna. In the period 1919 through to September 1923, he was involved in a whole range of activities that took place then. Now, in his assessment later on by the board of whatever they were, assessors for military pensions and military history, they more or less wrote off they acknowledged that he was involved in the affairs of the Fianna up to around about the time of the Anglo-Irish truce. But more or less said, although he rendered valuable service, it wasn't at the first rank, as it were. It would seem that, and in their own words, and I can read the detail for you later if you wish, that it was once the Civil War started, that's when all of the activity that he was engaged in came about, and he was involved in a wide range of events. He was arrested in his work in September 1922 and incarcerated in what's now Griffith Barracks, and from there was sent to Newbridge internment camp. But by October 1922 he had escaped from Newbridge, and between then and February 1923 was in what was called the Active Service Unit in the Dublin anti-treaty forces. And it was in that period that he was engaged in most of the actions he was involved in. And he was also in receipt of payment at the time from the forces he was engaged with. Now, during the 1920s, and when I use the word the labour movement, I use it in the broadest sense, from mainstream down to the minuscule manifestations of it. His principal activity in the 20s related to the nascent communist parties that were bubbling around at the time. Now, as anyone interested in it will know, trying to describe the affairs in communism in the 1920s We could spend all day trying to trace the movements in it, but I'm not going to do that. But in order to make sense of some of the things that happened, you have to be familiar with that. But like I say, I'll answer some of those points if they arise. He wasn't involved, as far as I can gather, in the first Communist Party of Ireland that emerged in 1921. He may have been involved to the extent that anyone was involved outside James Larkin in the Irish Worker League that emerged from 1923 on, in its earliest manifestation, that is. However, the first solid references there are to him in political affairs relate to the Workers' Party of Ireland in the period 1926 to 27. Now, you will know that Connolly and company in the Communist Party of Ireland were the recognised agency of the Comintern in Ireland between 21 and 23, when the Comintern switched horses and gave their recognition to Larkin's Irish Worker League. Of course, very little happened then. The expectations that they had didn't materialise. So this group set together to form this Workers' Party of Ireland, got themselves reasonably well organised, applied to the Comintern for recognition as an Irish section, and were immediately told to wind the thing up. Now, what happened was the leadership, being the good communists they were, obeyed the Comintern. The membership weren't too inclined to do that, and the entire leadership resigned. The focus of attention then in that world of activity went back to the Irish Worker League. And in the Workers' Party of Ireland period and in the Irish Worker League period that Ferguson is involved in, Ferguson's main activity that he's been allocated to and that he's particularly successful at is organising the Irish National Unemployed Workers Movement. Now you can see in trying to trace it that it's a fairly hopeless task. He's gone around organising groups in most of the cities in the country, but as soon as they're organised, they more or less melt away. And whereas they're trying to organise them from a political point of view, some of the expectation on the part of the people that are drawn to it is that that part of their activity would be going around collecting money for their own benefit. But they're very much opposed to that. Now, with the demise of the Workers' Party of Ireland, the unemployed movement it quietens down considerably and doesn't re-emerge then again until 1929. Although in the meantime there were some activities going on, organised by the Irish Worker League. Anyway, in 1927, I think, yes, 1927, the first three members of the Irish Worker League, or the first three people that were nominated by the Workers' League, attended the International Lenin School in Moscow. In the second three that were nominated, which was in 1930, Ferguson was one of them, and two Belfast men were the others. Ferguson's time in Moscow wasn't very long, because within a month of his arrival in October 1930, he was repatriated home on the basis of him not being healthy. Now, I should say that running throughout his life, you get the strong impression that he was never particularly healthy. Anyway, back in Ireland after his sojourn in Moscow, a short one, the revolutionary worker groups emerge. And for a short period of time in 1930, they have a parallel existence with the Irish Worker League. Now again, Ferguson is extremely active in organising the unemployed and seemingly in every local agitation and riot that's reported in the papers either demanding relief, demanding work, resisting evictions, organising demonstrations and riots and all that sort of thing. He's in the thick of all that. Anyway, to bring that particular phase of his activity to a close, with what's known as the third phase developments within the Comintern, when the whole policy is turned around against collaborating with other working class movements, you enter into this class against class movement. They immediately turn on themselves in January 1931. There's a meeting of the Revolutionary Workers' Group held when they start not only stabbing each other in the back, but in the front, and expelling each other and denouncing each other and criticising everyone. And anyway, we won't go into that for great detail. However, relevant to Ferguson is among those who were expelled from the party at that stage. Now, there's one other point that I have to make before we move off the 1920s. Ferguson has no record of being involved in trade union affairs at that stage. The only involvement he has, if you can call it that, is in 1924, in August 1924 through to October 1924, there was a strike in the CIE, well, not the CIE works, the railway works, the Great Southern and Western Railway Works in Inchicore, involving the 700-member branch of the Workers' Union of Ireland. Now, the person who has written an account of it headed the article, the strike that should never have taken place, which is true, it should never have taken place. It was idiotic from the beginning. It was a claim for extra money and also a demarcation dispute against another union, which meant that they immediately had the employer and the other union opposing them. The strike ended as a disaster. About 100 members lost their jobs. Anyway, Ferguson's involvement on the fringe of it. There was about 300 scabs engaged to take the place of the strikers. And on a night in September 1924, like I say, I can give you all the detail if you want, himself and two other named individuals, Clare and Hennessy, I think was the other's name, there's 12 or 15 of these were scabs having their supper in a shed that they're living in the railway works. And like a scene from a silent cowboy film, Ferguson and these two other fellas arrive into the thing with handkerchiefs tied around their face and revolvers and say, this is a hold-up. And they rob them all individually of their money. Now, whether that was a private initiative or whether it was because they were scabs or whether it was to put the money to the union's funds or not, I don't know. Anyway, there's a series, they get bail, they're remanded, they're brought, there's a court case, but they're acquitted. They're acquitted of the charge against them. Now, that's the first connection to trade unionism that there is with him. Now, if his initial engagement with the labour movement can be said to be that court case, his final engagement with it happened in February 1931, immediately after he was expelled from the revolutionary worker groups. They had a bookshop in Tavern Street called Workers' Books or something like that. And Ferguson, presumably in his capacity, he's described as a bookseller in the court case, ordered a parcel of books from the publisher's Constable in England. They arrive here and they're seized by the customs because apparently they contain one of the titles is banned in the country. Ferguson takes the case through the courts, represented by Herman Good, who was part of the Irish Labour Defence League at the time, another front organisation, claiming that they own the books that were in the parcel that aren't banned, and therefore they're entitled to be delivered to them. However, in the court case, Ferguson loses and also has costs awarded against him on the basis that technically under the law, a banned item, if it arrives in a parcel, under the law, the entire parcel can be seized, not just the item that's banned. And they tried to argue the case on the fact that the principal book in the order was Bernard Shaw's John Bull's Other Island. However, he lost the case. About a month after that, he emigrated to Britain. And about a month after that, he married a woman called Margaret Morda McInerney, who was from up around Cunningham Road, Hargate Street area. Now, between 1931 and 1937, probably, he's in Britain. Now, I know nothing about his life in Britain. I haven't had the opportunity of looking into that. But it has been said that he was involved in the book trade over there, that he was involved in the unemployed workers movement over there. But whether that's the case, I don't know. There's also a suggestion that he may have studied the law while he was there, but didn't complete his studies. However, in 1937, he's back in Ireland, in later records described as living in quite poor circumstances. And from 1938, he's employed as a boilerman by the Department of Defence in St. Brichan's Hospital, the military hospital off Infirmary Road that I don't think it still operates. Formerly George V Hospital from the First World War. In the early 40s, Ferguson is involved in claiming a military service pension. Now, he's denied a military service pension when he claims it, but he's awarded a certificate that he was a participant, and he's also awarded a medal for service in that period. Now, he appeals against the decision in 1942, and in 1943, he's actually awarded a pension for his service, and he's ordered to return the medal that he received so as that a bar can be added to it. Now, the bar, by the way, the military service medal was issued, very many of them, but not many of them were given with a bar, which is called the Comrock. Now, the Comrock was only awarded to people who actually faced an enemy or interacted with an enemy. And they've never revealed how many, but it could be as low as 5% of all the medals that were issued had this. However, he was awarded a pension, not a very big one, but nevertheless significant for its time. And I can give you the details of all that, and I can give you the details of what he was paid as an employee in the Department of Defence, if you wish. Now, the resurgence of the labour movement in the early 1940s in Dublin, arising from the campaigns against the Wages Standstill Order and the Trade Union Act, is reasonably well known. However, Ferguson's name doesn't appear in any of the references that you find to all of this. Now, why that's the case, I don't know. It might be because he worked in the Department of Defence. Now, the other question arises is that I've been asked was he involved in the Communist Party of Ireland that dated from 1931 up to 41? And as far as I can make out, he wasn't. That doesn't mean he wasn't. But as far as I can make out, he wasn't. Although it's improbable that they would have admitted them having expelled him. Although you wouldn't know what they would have done. But in 1944, he's chairman of the Boilermakers section, or secretary or chairman, I can't remember which at the moment. And the other principal person is a man called Peter Coates, who was a member of the Citizen Army during the rebellion. They're chairman of the Boilermakers section of the Irish Engineering Workers Union. And whatever row happened within that union, they decide as a body to transfer to the Workers' Union of Ireland, which becomes the nucleus of the number 6 branch, the engineering branch, within the WUI. Now, I have to give you some figures before we move on to the next phase of the talk about Ferguson. The Workers' Union of Ireland, from its foundation in 24, had been going downhill during now Jim Larkin's time. And by 1947, when he died, the reality of the situation is that the membership was probably down to about 10,000. Now, one of the big reasons for that is in 46, they transferred about 3,000 members to the new Federation of Rural Workers, an action that not many trade unions do, transferring members out. However, when Jim dies, the union in the immediate aftermath is shaken up and reformed. And John Smithers, the president, is appointed on a full-time basis. And out of the blue, Ferguson is appointed as national organizer on a full-time basis. Now, between 1947 and 1957, almost exactly 10 years, the Workers' Union of Ireland is utterly transformed and electrified. And I don't have the slightest doubt that the principal agency in it is Christy Ferguson. Membership each year goes up 3,000, 4,000. In every year, except one, membership increases. And it goes from about 10,000 up to 30,000 over that decade. And they're solid figures now, they're not paper figures. Now, besides that, and I'm winding up now, Chair, besides that, he is engaged in, he's the one that proposes at the Trades Council, before he's national organiser in the Workers' Union, the creation of the Lower Prices Council. Because the big fear was that with the lifting of the wages standstill order and the introduction of the Labour Court, that any increases that were won were going to be written off immediately by increased prices. Arising from that decision, you have the Women's Parliament that was created, which has been completely ignored. You have the Lower Prices Council that was created and went on working into the 1950s, which was a dynamic thing, principally under the leadership of Maureen O'Carroll. Over the same period, he's very active within the Labour Party, certainly from 44 right up to the end. And also, from 1951 up to about 1955, he and Sheila Green write a political column in the Irish Times every Saturday entitled Pinpointing Politics. Now, that was no mean achievement, because most of the contributors to the Times at the time were quite distinguished. Alistair Cook, Kees van Hoek, Patrick Campbell, Brian Inglis, and many others, really big name journalists of the period. Bertie Smiley, of course, and others. However, anyway, to conclude the thing, in early February 1957, Ferguson dies short of his 53rd birthday. His last appearance in public was at a 10th anniversary event marking the death of old Jim Larkin. And that was on the 31st of January, I think. He died on the 4th of February. And the cause of death was a multiplicity of ailments: emphysema, asthma, coronary sclerosis of long standing. He was buried, had a church funeral from Church Street. There was a military guard of honour at his funeral, and he was very quickly forgotten thereafter. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Charlie. That fascination, and it's amazing when you hear all of these people who you know, started off in Ireland, left, came back. I think there's a whole series to be written on that, isn't there, about the immigration and return. But anybody questions from the audience? Or I can't see who it is, so just, yeah. Now, I'm asking for questions, not long statements, okay?
Not a long statement, just a short statement. I didn't know Christy Ferguson, but I knew somebody who did, Sean Nolan. And he had a quotation that he used to always use from Christy, which went accordingly. He said, "The working class in the abstract are wonderful, but in the concrete tend to let you down."
Yes, just Charlie, certainly your paper was very informative, as all the papers that I have heard over the weekend, you know, and I have certainly been elevated by this conference in my own interest in the labour, trade union and political movement. What certainly stood out to me there, Charlie, was of the reality of the truth of what happens to an individual or an organisation within the labour movement or the political arena. I think any of us that have been involved can relate to situations that Charlie actually met in his lifetime within the organisations that he loved and the politics that he loved. And let's be honest, that is the reality of life and people when you're dealing with them. There is no 100% of not meeting that kind of situation in any. You have to have a very hard back. And yes, I think that was essential to anybody, and certainly the people we will be bringing in and the young people that we will be bringing in to the labour movement and the political movement. We will have to let them know that this is a hard graft on a personal basis and on a party basis and a command. The other, Charlie, I'm going to ask you, as a former municipal man at any of our meetings, on your pension, and I've been flipping on that. You said he got his pension, but what we would ask, the question we would ask in the municipal, was it retrospective?
Was it retrospective? Pension. There you go. Never mind the back money. What about the retrospection? Yeah.
When Fianna Fáil came into power in 1932, one of the first things they done was they set up a special military service act to cater for anti-treatyites. And virtually all the credit that Ferguson was given related to his activities as an anti-treatyite. And when he was awarded the pension, it was awarded backdated to the date of that act in 1934. And he received a lump sum payment of £177, which at the time was a substantial enough amount of money. But well, I won't go into that.
Any other?
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I can't see a thing with lights. So.
Here, hello? Yeah.
Go on, yeah.
Just, Charlie, I come from an Irish transport background. What surprises me about you yourself was the Workers' Union or Workers' Union of Ireland. How come he was forgotten within the Workers' Union of Ireland? Was he a difficult person to deal with or something?
Yeah. Well, that's the question, right? That's what. I mean, this today is the culmination of me collecting bits of a jigsaw puzzle. And I've written most of it up. I still have to finesse it a little bit. But it's the result of picking. Now, for me to answer the question as to why he's forgotten would entail speculation. And it would also entail tilting at some sacred cows. No, no. Well, all I'd say to you is this. The membership was going downhill up to the time he was appointed national organiser. It trebled in the 10 years he was in the job. And in the 15, 16, wait no, 74, 10, in the 17 years after his death, it stood still. Now, the question is, who got the credit for Ferguson's work? Right? Yeah. And if it was the case that you remembered him, was that seen in some way as diminishing the efforts of others or whatever? But I remembered quite, I won't list the people now that I asked, and you know, you got the blank, like, from a lot of them. But there were 4 or 5 people who lit up when you mentioned his name, and remembered him with great fondness. In the Labour Party, in the Union, in the in other areas of activity. Wonderful thing. Now, there's an awful lot of things I didn't say today. There was 4 pieces that I found written on him. One was a profile, obviously written by himself in the Union magazine in the 50s, where he wrote profiles of all his colleagues. But there's a very important point to be made about it. There's a lengthy piece written by Emmett O'Connor on his expulsion from the Revolutionary Workers' Group. There's a good paragraph written by Brian Inglis in his memoir, Downstart. He was a journalist and a Labour activist in the 40s. And, but the interesting thing about the thing Kirwan wrote about, or Ferguson, I keep saying, Ferguson wrote about himself, was that all that he wrote about himself was true. I was able to verify, and there was nothing in it that couldn't be verified afterwards. But like I say, the people who did want to remember him lit up with him when they. But on the other hand, you had the exact opposite. You got the blank. You got the yeah.
Any more questions before we finish? Just take one more if there's any more. No, we're all done. Listen, thanks again, Charlie. Thanks for giving each other appreciation there. That was fascinating, and we hope to read the finished article. Thanks.